The sound of heels clicking against marble echoed through the opulent charity gala at the Renaissance Hotel in downtown Atlanta. Among the sea of evening gowns and tailored suits, Dr. Angela Mitchell moved with quiet confidence, her emerald dress catching the light from crystal chandeliers overhead. Few people in that room knew that the elegant woman discussing education reform with the mayor's wife was married to the most powerful law enforcement official in the country. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What happened next would expose the dangerous gap between privilege and prejudice, proving that even the closest connections to power couldn't shield someone from systemic bias when they stepped outside the protective bubble of their status. Dr. Angela Mitchell adjusted the microphone at the podium, scanning the faces of 200 educators packed into the auditorium at Emory University. As the Dean of Educational Psychology, she commanded respect through decades of groundbreaking research on childhood trauma and learning disabilities. Her published works lined university libraries across the nation, and her testimony had influenced federal education policy for the past 15 years. The correlation between early intervention and long-term academic success isn't just statistical, she said, her voice carrying the authority that came from transforming thousands of young lives. The audience hung on every word. Dr. Mitchell had built her reputation not just on academic brilliance, but on her ability to bridge the gap between research and real-world application. Her community programs in underserved Atlanta neighborhoods had become models replicated in 43 states. After the presentation, department heads and graduate students clustered around her, eager to discuss implementation strategies. Dr. Mitchell answered each question with the patience of someone genuinely passionate about her work. She had learned long ago that true change happened through persistent education, one conversation at a time. Dr. Mitchell, your longitudinal study on reading intervention programs just secured our department another federal grant, said Professor James Hartford, beaming with pride. The university board wants to expand your community outreach initiative. She smiled, remembering the 8-year-old girl from East Atlanta who had struggled with dyslexia until Angela's team intervened. Now that same girl was a sophomore at Georgia Tech studying engineering. These were the victories that mattered more than any academic accolade. Her phone buzzed with a text from her husband. Senate hearing running late. Don't wait up. Love you. FBI Director Marcus Mitchell's schedule had become increasingly demanding since taking the position 3 years ago. Their 22-year marriage had weathered many storms, his rise through the bureau ranks, her doctoral studies, and the challenges of being a high-profile interracial couple in the South. But they had learned to protect their private life fiercely. Very few people knew about their connection. Angela had kept her maiden name professionally long before it became fashionable, and Marcus understood the importance of her independent identity. She was Dr. Angela Mitchell, not the FBI director's wife. That distinction mattered to both of them. At 6:30 p.m., Angela finally packed her briefcase and headed to the faculty parking garage. Her silver BMW sat under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by the typical collection of professors' modest sedans and hybrid vehicles. She had earned everything she owned through her own merit: the endowed chair position, the consulting fees from her private practice, and the respect of her colleagues who had no idea her husband commanded a budget of $9 billion. The drive to Buckhead took 45 minutes through Atlanta's notorious traffic. Their home sat on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees, the kind of established neighborhood where neighbors minded their own business and privacy was respected. Angela had specifically chosen the area for its discretion: no gated community fanfare, no obvious displays of wealth that might attract unwanted attention to Marcus's position. Inside the Tudor-style house, she kicked off her heels and poured herself a glass of wine. The walls displayed her own achievements: her Harvard PhD diploma, photographs with former education secretaries, and awards from the American Psychological Association. Marcus's FBI career existed in a separate study upstairs, behind a door that remained locked when they entertained. Their strategy for maintaining normalcy had worked perfectly for years. Angela attended faculty functions, served on community boards, and volunteered at local schools. Nobody questioned her lifestyle or made assumptions about her income sources. She was simply the respected professor who lived quietly in Buckhead and drove herself to work every day. Her phone rang, her sister calling from Los Angeles. "How's the brilliant professor tonight?" laughed Carmen Rodriguez, Angela's younger sister who worked as a social worker in East LA. "Exhausted but productive. We just got funding for 3 new literacy centers." "And how's your mysterious husband? Still saving the world from federal crime?" Angela chuckled. "Something like that. He's working late again." Carmen had met Marcus exactly twice in 22 years, at their wedding and at their father's funeral. The secrecy wasn't personal, it was professional necessity. Even Angela's own family understood the delicate balance required when your spouse holds one of the most sensitive positions in government. "You know I worry about you down there," Carmen said, her tone shifting. "All those news stories about Georgia, the protests, the tensions. I'm careful, Carmen. Always am." But even as she said it, Angela knew that being careful had its limitations. She had navigated the South as a successful Black woman for decades, understanding exactly which spaces were safe, which conversations to avoid, which assumptions people might make. Her professional reputation provided a certain shield, but that shield only worked when people knew who she was. At 11 p.m., she decided not to wait for Marcus and headed upstairs. Their bedroom overlooked the back garden, where security lights illuminated the fence line. Most neighbors assumed the subtle security measures were standard for affluent professionals. They had no idea that the man who lived here received daily threat assessments and traveled with armed protection. Angela set her alarm for 6 a.m. Tomorrow would bring another day of lectures, research meetings, and community program visits. She would continue being Dr. Mitchell, the dedicated educator who happened to live in a nice house and drive a decent car. The compartmentalization that protected their marriage would remain intact. As she drifted off to sleep, Angela had no way of knowing that tomorrow evening would shatter the careful anonymity they had spent years constructing. The woman who had built her life on evidence-based research and methodical planning was about to discover how quickly assumptions could override facts, even for someone with her credentials and connections. The last thing she saw before closing her eyes was Marcus's FBI Academy graduation photo on the nightstand, a reminder of the invisible authority that surrounded her life but never defined her identity. The next evening, Angela sat in the crowded community center in East Atlanta, surrounded by parents whose children participated in her literacy program. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as she reviewed reading assessments with Maria Santos, whose 7-year-old son had made remarkable progress in just 3 months. "Miguel is reading 2 grade levels above where he started," Angela explained, pointing to the test scores. "Your consistency with the home exercises made all the difference." Maria's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Dr. Mitchell, you saved my boy's future. The teachers at school were ready to give up on him." These moments reminded Angela why she had chosen community outreach over prestigious research positions at elite universities. Real change happened in places like this, cramped community centers in neighborhoods that most academics never visited. The meeting ran until 9:30 p.m. As parents filtered out, thanking her repeatedly, Angela packed her materials and headed to her car. The BMW stood alone under a broken streetlight in the small parking lot behind the building. She had deliberately chosen the modest vehicle for these visits, knowing that flashier transportation might create barriers with families already struggling economically. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Marcus. She hit redial as she started the engine. "Hey, sorry I missed your calls. Community meeting ran long." "Where are you?" His voice carried the edge it got when FBI business consumed his thoughts. "East Atlanta,
Heading home now. Everything okay? Just be careful driving through that area at night. I'll see you at home. Angela had navigated these streets for 15 years without incident. Her work required her presence in communities that others might consider risky, but she had built genuine relationships here. Parents knew her, shop owners waved when she passed, and local police had grown accustomed to seeing her BMW parked at the community center. Tonight felt different somehow. As she stopped at a red light on Memorial Drive, she noticed the police cruiser in her rearview mirror. Nothing unusual. Cops patrolled this area heavily. But when the light turned green and she continued toward the highway, the cruiser stayed behind her, matching her speed exactly. Angela maintained the speed limit, using her turn signals precisely, keeping both hands visible on the steering wheel. She had learned these precautions long before marrying an FBI director. Growing up in Alabama had taught her that interactions with law enforcement required careful choreography, regardless of education or social status. The cruiser's headlights filled her mirrors as she merged onto I-20 West towards Buckhead, still following. Angela felt her pulse quicken, but kept her breathing steady. Maybe the officer was simply heading in the same direction. Her exit approached, North Side Drive towards Buckhead. The cruiser followed her up the ramp. Now Angela knew this wasn't coincidental. She had committed no traffic violations, her registration was current, her insurance valid. But experience had taught her that logic didn't always apply to these situations.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. She pulled into a well-lit gas station, hoping the public location might discourage any confrontation. The police car parked directly behind her, blocking her exit. In the side mirror, she watched a large man in uniform climb out. Captain's bars gleamed on his collar. Captain Robert Hayes approached her driver's side window with the measured stride of someone accustomed to compliance. At 52, he commanded the East Atlanta precinct with an iron fist, earning commendations for reduced crime statistics that never mentioned his controversial methods. His pale blue eyes surveyed Angela through the window with unconcealed suspicion. Angela rolled down her window halfway, keeping her hands on the steering wheel. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." His voice carried the authority of 28 years in law enforcement. "May I ask why you stopped me? I wasn't speeding, and I used all my signals properly." Hayes rested his hand on his service weapon. "I said step out of the vehicle, now." Angela's mind raced through her options. Compliance was safest, but she also knew her rights. More importantly, she understood how these encounters could escalate regardless of cooperation. "I'm going to reach for my purse to get my license and registration," she said slowly, narrating each movement. "Keep your hands where I can see them. Out of the car first." She opened the door and stepped onto the asphalt, her professional attire a stark contrast to Hayes' assumptions about who belonged in this neighborhood at this hour. Her university ID badge hung from a lanyard around her neck, but Hayes didn't seem to notice academic credentials. "What were you doing in East Atlanta?" "I work with the literacy program at the community center. I'm a professor at Emory University." Snurd. Professor? In that neighborhood? What were you really doing down there? Angela maintained her composure despite the insult. "I coordinate educational programs for underserved communities. I've been doing this work for 15 years. "Sure you have. Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle." "Sir, I haven't committed any crime. I was simply driving home from work." Hayes stepped closer, his bulk intimidating in the fluorescent light. "You were casing that area, probably looking for targets. Nice car, expensive clothes, perfect cover for someone planning robberies." The accusation was so absurd that Angela almost laughed. Instead, she reached slowly for her purse. "My identification will verify everything I've told you." "I told you to put your hands on the car, now."
I'm reaching for my wallet to show you my university ID, my driver's license, and my business cards. I'm moving very slowly so you can see everything." Hayes grabbed her wrist. "You're not listening. Hands on the vehicle, now." Angela felt the cold metal of the BMW against her palms as Hayes forced her into position. Her mind cataloged every detail, the time, the location, the witnesses pumping gas nearby who had stopped to stare. She thought about Marcus, probably wondering why she hadn't arrived home yet. "Check my credentials," she said firmly. "Call Emory University. Verify my identity." Hayes patted her down roughly, his hands lingering longer than necessary. "We've got plenty of fake IDs come through here. Real creative, these criminals." "I'm not a criminal. I'm Dr. Angela Mitchell, Dean of Educational Psychology at Emory University. My office number is 404-727-2345. Call them." "Right, and I'm the governor of Georgia." Hayes pulled zip-tie restraints from his belt. The plastic bit into Angela's wrists as he secured them behind her back. She had watched this same scene play out in countless news reports, but experiencing it firsthand felt surreal and terrifying. "You're making a serious mistake," Angela said, fighting to keep her voice level. "I demand to speak to your supervisor." "I am the supervisor, lady, and you're going downtown." As Hayes pushed her toward his cruiser, Angela caught sight of her reflection in the BMW's window, a successful professional reduced to a suspect based on nothing more than her presence in a neighborhood where Captain Hayes believed she didn't belong. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was being arrested for the very community work that had earned her national recognition. Hayes opened the rear door of the police car. "Watch your head," he said with mock courtesy before shoving her inside.
The door slammed shut, trapping Angela in the cage-like rear compartment. Through the mesh barrier, she watched Hayes rifle through her purse, examining her identification with dismissive skepticism. Her phone lay on the BMW's front seat, unreachable, unable to alert Marcus that his wife had just become another statistic in the very system he had sworn to uphold. The East Atlanta police station buzzed with late-night activity as Captain Hayes hauled Angela through the back entrance. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across worn linoleum floors that had seen decades of similar scenes. Officers glanced up from paperwork, their eyes following the unusual sight of a well-dressed woman in zip-tie restraints. "What have you got there, Captain?" called Officer Janet Foster from behind the booking desk. "Suspicious activity in the community center area. Claims she's some kind of professor." Hayes' tone dripped with sarcasm as he guided Angela toward the booking area. Angela kept her voice steady, despite the plastic cutting into her wrists. "I am Dr. Angela Mitchell from Emory University. I need to make a phone call." Foster, a 15-year veteran with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, studied Angela's appearance with professional curiosity. Something didn't fit the typical profile of East Atlanta arrests, but she had learned not to question Captain Hayes' judgment. "Phone call comes after processing," Foster replied, pulling out the standard booking forms. "Empty your pockets. Remove any jewelry." "My purse is still in Captain Hayes' car with my identification. I need you to verify my credentials before this goes any further." Hayes returned from securing Angela's BMW, carrying her designer purse like evidence in a drug bust. He dumped the contents across Foster's desk with theatrical flourish. Emory University ID badge, multiple credit cards, even business cards claiming she's some kind of dean. Probably the best fake package I've seen in years. Foster picked up the university ID, examining the holographic security features and Angela's photograph. "This looks pretty legitimate to me, Captain. They're getting better at forgeries. Run her prints, check for outstanding warrants. I guarantee this woman has a record." Angela watched Foster's expression shift from skepticism to confusion as she processed the high-quality identification documents. "Ma'am, these credentials appear authentic. Your driver's license shows a Buckhead address." "Because I live in Buckhead and work at Emory.
I was in East Atlanta conducting community outreach through my university position. I do this every week. Hayes slammed his hand on the desk. Enough with the act. Rich professors don't slum it in East Atlanta at night. She was casing the area for robberies, guaranteed. Captain, maybe we should call the university to verify. We verify nothing until she's processed and printed. For all we know, she stole that ID from the real professor. Angela felt the situation spiraling beyond reason. Look at my credit cards. Check my address. Call my emergency contact. Emergency contact could be an accomplice, Hayes counted. Foster, get her printed and photographed. I want a full background check. As Foster led Angela to the fingerprinting station, other officers began to take notice. Sergeant Mike Torres, working the night shift, observed the unusual booking with growing concern. Captain, I've never seen anyone with this many legitimate-looking credentials. Maybe we should slow down and verify her story. Hayes whirled around. Are you questioning my judgment, Sergeant? No, sir, just suggesting standard verification procedures. Standard procedure is to book suspects and ask questions later. She was in a high-crime area with no legitimate reason. Actually, Angela interjected, I have receipts from the community center, parking validation, and a signed contract with the literacy program. Everything's in my briefcase in the car. Hayes ignored her completely. Torres, call Detective Williams down here. I want a full investigation into whatever crew this woman's running with. Angela realized with growing horror that Hayes was constructing an entire criminal conspiracy around her presence in East Atlanta. His assumptions had calcified into certainty, and evidence contradicting his theory was being dismissed as sophisticated deception. Foster completed the fingerprinting process, noting Angela's cooperation and lack of resistance. Ma'am, I'm required to ask about any medical conditions or medications.
I have mild hypertension, controlled with medication. I'm also diabetic and need to eat regularly. It's been 4 hours since my last meal. We'll get you something from the vending machine, Foster said with genuine concern. Hayes overheard. She'll eat when the processing is complete. Don't let her manipulate you with sob stories. Detective Sarah Williams arrived, a sharp-eyed investigator known for thorough casework. She reviewed the spread of identification documents with professional interest. Captain, this is an unusual arrest. The suspect has extensive legitimate identification, expensive clothing, and claims professional credentials that appear authentic. Appearances can be deceiving, Detective. I want you to dig into her background, find out who she's really working with. Williams picked up Angela's university business card. It wouldn't hurt to make one phone call to verify her employment. At 11 p.m., university offices are closed. She's counting on that. Angela stepped forward. Detective, I have colleagues who can be reached after hours. Department heads, research assistants, community program coordinators. Any of them can verify my identity and my work schedule. Convenient, Hayes sneered, a whole network of people ready to provide alibis. Williams studied Angela's demeanor carefully. 20 years of detective work had taught her to recognize deception, and nothing about this woman suggested criminal intent. Captain, I recommend we at least attempt to verify her story before proceeding further. I recommend you follow orders and investigate her background like I asked. The tension in the booking area was becoming palpable. Other officers exchanged glances, sensing their captain's unusual rigidity. Foster continued processing Angela's paperwork, but her movements had slowed as doubts crept in. Angela realized that Hayes's authority was intimidating his subordinates into compliance despite their obvious reservations. The institutional hierarchy was working against basic investigative procedures. Detective Williams, I authorize you to contact FBI Director Marcus Mitchell. He can verify my identity immediately. The booking area fell silent. Several officers looked up from their desks. Hayes laughed loudly. Now she's claiming connections to the FBI Director. What's next, the Queen of England? I'm not claiming connections. I'm stating a fact.
Director Mitchell is my husband." Williams' eyebrows shot up. Foster stopped typing entirely. Even Torres moved closer to hear clearly. "You're married to FBI Director Marcus Mitchell?" Williams asked carefully. "Yes, we've been married for 22 years. He can verify everything I've told you within minutes." Hayes's face reddened. "This is getting ridiculous. Next she'll claim she's the Queen of England. Williams, I want her charged with impersonating a federal agent in addition to everything else." "Detective, I didn't impersonate anyone. I stated my relationship to verify my identity." "Claiming marriage to the FBI director is impersonating the association. Added to the charges." Williams looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Captain, maybe you should do your job instead of falling for an obvious con artist." Angela watched the power dynamics play out with professional fascination despite her personal terror. Hayes's authority was absolute within this building, and his subordinates were trapped between their training and their superiors' increasingly irrational commands. Foster finally spoke up. "Captain, her fingerprints came back clean. No criminal record, no outstanding warrants. She's never been caught before, doesn't prove innocence." Angela felt the last avenue of reasonable resolution closing. Hayes had invested too much ego in his theory to back down now, and his rank protected him from challenges by subordinates who could see the obvious flaws in his logic. "I want her in a holding cell until Detective Williams completes a full background investigation, and I want to know who else is involved in whatever scheme she's running." As Foster led Angela toward the holding area, she caught Williams' eye. The detective's expression suggested she would pursue verification despite Hayes's resistance. But Angela also understood that challenging a captain's direct orders required courage that not every officer possessed. The cell door clanged shut, leaving Angela alone with the growing certainty that this nightmare was far from over. Detective Williams sat at her desk, staring at Angela's business card, while the rest of the station hummed with routine late-night activity. 20 years of police work had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct screamed that Captain Hayes had made a catastrophic error. The woman in holding cell 3 possessed credentials that would be nearly impossible to fake, spoke with the measured confidence of genuine authority, and showed none of the nervous tells that typically accompanied deception. Against direct orders, Williams picked up her phone and dialed the FBI's 24-hour operations center. "FBI Operations, Agent Rodriguez speaking. This is Detective Sarah Williams, Atlanta PD. I need to verify the identity of someone claiming to be married to Director Marcus Mitchell." A pause. "Can you hold, please?" Williams waited, her heart pounding as she considered the career implications of disobeying Hayes's explicit instructions. But her conscience wouldn't allow her to participate in what increasingly appeared to be a massive injustice. "Detective Williams, I'm transferring you to Deputy Director James Patterson." Another pause, then a crisp voice. "Detective, this is Deputy Director Patterson. What's your situation?" "Sir, we have a woman in custody claiming to be Dr. Angela Mitchell, wife of Director Mitchell. She was arrested on suspicion of criminal activity in East Atlanta." Silence stretched for 10 seconds. When Patterson spoke again, his tone had shifted to barely controlled fury. "You arrested Dr. Angela Mitchell, the Dean of Educational Psychology at Emory University?" Williams felt her stomach drop. "Yes, sir. My captain insisted." "Detective, you've arrested the FBI director's wife. Dr. Mitchell has been conducting community outreach in East Atlanta for 15 years with full federal awareness. We've provided security briefings for that area specifically because of her work there." The phone nearly slipped from Williams's hands. "Sir, I need to inform my superiors immediately." "Don't inform anyone yet. I'm contacting Director Mitchell now. He's en route to your location with a federal response team. Nobody, and I mean nobody, moves Dr. Mitchell until he arrives." The line went dead. Williams sat frozen,
understanding that she had just confirmed everyone's worst fears. Hayes hadn't just arrested an innocent professor. He had arrested the wife of the most powerful law enforcement official in America. Across the bullpen, Hayes emerged from his office, coffee in hand, completely oblivious to the tsunami approaching his career. "Williams, what's the status of our suspect's background check?" Williams stood slowly, her legs unsteady. "Captain, we need to talk. Privately. Just give me the report. I want charges filed within the hour." "Sir, I verified her identity. She's telling the truth about everything." Hayes's expression darkened. "I told you not to waste time on verification calls." "Captain, she really is Dr. Angela Mitchell, and she really is married to Director Marcus Mitchell." The coffee mug slipped from Hayes's hand, shattering against the floor. The entire bullpen fell silent as officers turned to stare. "What did you just say?" "I called the FBI Operations Center. Deputy Director Patterson confirmed her identity. Director Mitchell is en route here now." Hayes's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and dawning horror. "You called the FBI behind my back?" "Sir, I called to verify a suspect's claims. That's standard investigative procedure." Officer Foster approached cautiously. "Captain, should I release Dr. Mitchell from holding?" "Nobody touches that cell until I figure this out," Hayes snapped, but his voice cracked with panic. Torres stepped forward. "Captain, if she's really the FBI director's wife—" "She's not. This is some elaborate scam, and Williams fell for it." Williams pulled out her notepad. "Sir, Deputy Director Patterson knew details about Dr. Mitchell's community work that only federal authorities would know. He mentioned specific security briefings about her East Atlanta activities." The color drained from Hayes's face. He grabbed Williams's arm. "Call them back. Tell them there was a misunderstanding. Tell them we're releasing her immediately." "Sir, it's too late. Director Mitchell is already en route." At that moment, the station's front doors burst open. FBI Director Marcus Mitchell strode through the entrance, flanked by 4 federal agents in tactical gear. His face was a mask of cold fury that made every officer in the building step backwards instinctively. Marcus Mitchell commanded attention not just through his position, but through 30 years of federal law enforcement experience that radiated from every movement. At 58, he had built his reputation on methodical investigation and measured responses, but tonight his legendary composure had evaporated entirely. "Where is my wife?" His voice cut through the station like a blade. Hayes stepped forward, attempting to salvage some authority. "Director Mitchell, I can explain. Can you explain why you arrested Dr. Angela Mitchell, a respected academic conducting federally monitored community outreach, and held her for 3 hours without verification?" "Sir, she was acting suspiciously in a high-crime area." Marcus's eyes blazed. "She was doing the same community work she's done every week for 15 years, work that your department has been briefed about multiple times." Foster quickly retrieved the holding cell keys. "Sir, I'll release Dr. Mitchell immediately. Nobody moves until I see her condition." Marcus strode toward the holding area, his agents flanking him. The station personnel followed at a respectful distance, understanding they were witnessing a career-ending disaster unfold in real time. Angela sat on the narrow bench in cell 3, her professional composure intact, despite 3 hours of institutional humiliation. When she saw Marcus approaching, relief flooded her features. "Are you hurt?" Marcus asked through the bars, his voice gentle for the first time since entering the building. "I'm fine physically, but Marcus, this wasn't a mistake. This was systematic prejudice disguised as police work." Foster unlocked the cell with trembling hands. Angela stepped out and immediately moved to her husband's side, their unity a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. Marcus turned to Hayes, his federal authority now fully displayed. "Captain Hayes, you arrested my wife based on nothing more than her presence in a community where she's been working for 15 years.
You ignored her credentials, dismissed her explanations, and refused to verify her identity, despite multiple requests. Hayes attempted one final defense. "Sir, we follow standard procedures for suspicious activity." Suspicious activity? Marcus's voice rose. A professor driving home from work is suspicious activity? Or was it suspicious because you couldn't imagine a black woman legitimately belonging in both East Atlanta and Buckhead? The silence that followed was deafening. Every officer in the station understood they had just witnessed their captain being accused of racial profiling by the FBI director himself. Detective Williams stepped forward. "Sir, I tried to verify Dr. Mitchell's identity, but Captain Hayes ordered me not to make verification calls." Marcus's gaze shifted to Williams, then to Foster, then to Torres. So there were officers who suspected this arrest was wrong, but the chain of command prevented proper investigation? Torres nodded reluctantly. "Yes, sir. Several of us had concerns about the arrest." Angela spoke for the first time since her release. "Director Mitchell, this isn't about personal grievance. This incident represents systemic problems that need federal attention." Marcus nodded, understanding immediately that his wife's experience was a window into broader issues that demanded institutional response. The FBI director who had entered the building seeking justice for his wife now saw an opportunity to address systemic failures that affected countless others. Hayes stood isolated, watching his 28-year career crumble as the implications of his actions became clear. The arrest that was supposed to demonstrate his tough-on-crime leadership instead exposed the dangerous prejudices that federal authorities would no longer tolerate. "Captain Hayes, you've just provided the federal government with a textbook example of civil rights violations. I hope you have a good lawyer." Within minutes of Angela's release, the East Atlanta police station transformed into a federal crime scene. FBI forensic specialists photographed the holding cell, documented the booking paperwork, and began interviewing officers who had witnessed the arrest. Deputy Director Patterson coordinated the federal response while Marcus ensured Angela received immediate medical attention from paramedics, who checked her wrists for zip tie injuries. Police Chief David Morrison received the call at 12:47 a.m. His phone rang 4 times before he answered, groggily expecting routine night shift reports. What he heard instead sent him scrambling from bed to his car in under 10 minutes. "Chief, this is Deputy Director Patterson, FBI. We have a civil rights incident at your East Atlanta station involving Director Mitchell's wife."
Morrison's blood pressure spiked as Patterson detailed the arrest. By the time he reached the station, news vans were already gathering outside, their satellite dishes extending toward the dark sky like metal flowers seeking light. Inside, Morrison found chaos barely contained by FBI professionalism. Marcus Mitchell stood near the booking desk, reviewing arrest documentation with the methodical precision that had made him legendary within federal law enforcement. Angela sat nearby, declining offers of coffee while answering questions from FBI civil rights investigators. "Director Mitchell," Morrison began, his voice shaking, "I want to express the department's deepest apologies." Marcus held up a hand. "Chief Morrison, this isn't about apologies. This is about systematic failures that require systematic solutions." Morrison's career had survived budget cuts, political scandals, and public relations disasters, but nothing had prepared him to explain to the FBI director why his captain had arrested the FBI director's wife. "Sir, Captain Hayes will face immediate suspension pending full investigation." "Suspension isn't sufficient," Angela interjected. "This arrest violated multiple federal civil rights statutes. Captain Hayes made no attempt to verify my identity, ignored obvious evidence of my legitimacy, and constructed criminal theories based solely on racial assumptions." Morrison looked to Marcus desperately. "Director,
What can we do to make this right? You can cooperate fully with the federal investigation and prepare for comprehensive departmental reforms. This incident will trigger a Justice Department review of your entire operation. Hayes emerged from an interrogation room where FBI agents had been documenting his version of events. His uniform looked disheveled, his face pale with the realization that his law enforcement career was ending in federal disgrace. "Chief, I was following standard protocols." "You were following prejudiced assumptions," Angela cut him off. "Standard protocol requires verification of identification, not dismissal of credentials because they don't match your stereotypes." Detective Williams approached Morrison with visible anxiety. "Chief, I attempted to verify Dr. Mitchell's identity against Captain Hayes's direct orders. I want that on record." Morrison nodded gratefully. At least some of his officers had shown proper judgment. "Detective Williams, prepare a full report on your interactions with the suspect, with Dr. Mitchell." "Already completed, sir. I've also documented statements from Officers Foster and Torres regarding their concerns about the arrest." Marcus reviewed Williams' preliminary report with approval. "Detective, your initiative prevented this incident from becoming worse. The FBI will note your professionalism in our final report." Officer Foster stood near the booking desk, watching federal agents photograph her fingerprinting equipment. "Dr. Mitchell, I want to apologize personally. I should have insisted on verification calls." Angela appreciated the genuine remorse. "Officer Foster, you followed procedures within a flawed command structure. That's exactly what we need to fix." Torres joined the conversation. "Ma'am, I've worked in this area for 8 years. I know your community programs. I should have spoken up stronger when Captain Hayes ignored your credentials." Officer Torres, institutional hierarchy makes challenging superiors difficult. But tonight proves why that hierarchy needs reform when it protects prejudice over justice. Hayes attempted one final intervention. "Chief Morrison, this is all overblown. One arrest doesn't justify federal oversight of our entire department." Patterson stepped forward. "Captain Hayes, you arrested a prominent community leader, ignored multiple forms of legitimate identification, dismissed university credentials, and refused verification procedures. Then you accused her of impersonating a federal agent when she revealed her marriage to Director Mitchell. This isn't one arrest, it's a pattern of civil rights violations." Morrison felt his department slipping beyond local control. "Deputy Director Patterson, what specific federal involvement are we looking at?" "Immediate Justice Department review of arrest procedures, bias training requirements, citizen oversight implementation, and potentially federal monitoring of all future civil rights complaints." The weight of institutional consequences settled over the station. Morrison understood that Hayes's prejudiced assumptions had triggered federal intervention that would reshape Atlanta policing for years to come. Angela stood and addressed the assembled officers. "I don't want revenge against individuals. I want systemic change that protects everyone from what happened to me tonight. Captain Hayes made assumptions about my legitimacy based on his stereotypes about race and class. That thinking endangers every citizen who doesn't fit narrow profiles of respectability." Hayes's face reddened. "I was protecting this community from criminal activity."
"You were enforcing your personal biases," Marcus interrupted. "Dr. Mitchell has contributed more to East Atlanta community safety through education programs than most officers contribute through arrests." Patterson received a call and stepped aside for a brief conversation. When he returned, his expression was grim. "Chief Morrison, media outlets have obtained video of the arrest. This story will be national news within hours." Morrison's phone immediately began buzzing with calls from reporters, city officials, and political figures. The incident was expanding beyond local law enforcement into broader conversations about police reform and racial justice. Angela watched the panic spread among station personnel and felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Her arrest would spark necessary conversations, but the human cost was visible in every officer's face as they contemplated careers potentially destroyed by association with Hayes's actions. "Chief Morrison," Angela said, "I'm willing to work with your department on reform implementation, but federal oversight is non-negotiable. Tonight proved that internal accountability mechanisms failed completely." Morrison nodded reluctantly. "Dr. Mitchell, the department will cooperate fully with federal recommendations." Marcus checked his watch. "Chief, we need Dr. Mitchell's personal belongings returned immediately. Her vehicle needs to be released from impound, and all arrest records need to be sealed pending federal review." Foster quickly gathered Angela's purse, keys, and personal items from the evidence locker. "Everything's here, Dr. Mitchell. I documented the chain of custody personally." As Angela reclaimed her belongings, she noticed Hayes standing alone near the dispatch desk. His 28-year career was ending not in retirement honors, but in federal civil rights violations. Despite her anger, she felt a flicker of sympathy for a man whose prejudices had destroyed his own future as thoroughly as they had threatened hers. Marcus placed his hand on Angela's shoulder. "Are you ready to go home?" Angela looked around the station one final time, memorizing details that would become evidence in federal investigations and congressional hearings. "I'm ready. But Marcus, this doesn't end tonight. This becomes the foundation for everything we do next." Patterson approached with final instructions for Morrison. "Chief, federal investigators will return tomorrow morning to begin a comprehensive departmental review. Have all arrest records, training materials, and complaint procedures ready for examination." As Angela and Marcus left the station, reporters surged forward with questions about civil rights, police reform, and federal intervention. Angela paused at the microphones, understanding that her next words would frame national discussions about justice and accountability. "What happened to me tonight happens to countless Americans who lack my resources and connections," she said clearly. "We're going to ensure it stops happening to anyone." 3 weeks after Angela's arrest, the story had exploded across national media platforms with a force that surprised even seasoned political observers. CNN led with "FBI Director's Wife Arrested, a Window into Police Bias," while the New York Times published a comprehensive investigation titled "When Credentials Don't Matter: Race and Police Assumptions in America." The arrest video, captured by a gas station customer on their phone, had been viewed 47 million times across social media platforms. The footage showed Angela's dignified compliance contrasted against Hayes's aggressive dismissal of her credentials, creating a visceral illustration of institutional bias that transcended partisan political boundaries. Attorney General Patricia Hernandez convened an emergency task force on police accountability, with Angela serving as a key advisor. The Justice Department announced federal investigations into 12 major police departments using Angela's case as a template for identifying systematic civil rights violations. "Dr. Mitchell's experience represents the tip of an iceberg," Hernandez declared during a press conference. "If this can happen to the FBI director's wife, imagine what happens to citizens without her resources and connections." Congressional hearings began within 2 weeks. Representative Michael Thompson, chair of the House Judiciary Committee, called Angela to testify about her experience and recommendations for federal police reform legislation. Angela sat before the packed hearing room, cameras capturing every word as she detailed the night's events. "Committee members, I want to be clear. This isn't about one bad officer. Captain Hayes's actions were enabled by institutional systems that prioritize officer assumptions over citizens' rights." Republican committee members initially approached the hearing with skepticism, viewing it as political theater. But Angela's measured testimony and unassailable credentials gradually shifted the tone. When Representative Lisa Davidson of Texas asked about false identification concerns, Angela responded with data from her own research. Representative Davidson, studies show that racial bias in police stops increases by 43% during evening hours regardless of crime statistics. Captain Hayes didn't arrest me because my ID looked fake. He arrested me because he couldn't reconcile my appearance with his assumptions about who belongs in different communities.
The hearing room fell silent as Angela continued. I hold advanced degrees from Harvard University, lead federal education initiatives, and have contributed to police training programs in 37 states. Yet none of that mattered when I drove through East Atlanta at 9:30 p.m. Senator James Rodriguez of Arizona, known for his tough-on-crime stance, leaned forward. Dr. Mitchell, what specific reforms would prevent similar incidents? Angela had prepared extensively for this moment. Senator, we need 3 immediate changes: mandatory identity verification before arrest, civilian oversight boards with subpoena power, and federal standards for police interactions with community workers. Outside the Capitol building, protests had grown from dozens to thousands as civil rights organizations rallied around Angela's case. The NAACP organized a dignity march that drew participants from all 50 states, while university professors nationwide wore green ribbons, symbolizing academic freedom and community engagement. Dr. Jennifer Washington, president of Spelman College, addressed the crowd from the Capitol steps. Dr. Angela Mitchell's arrest reminds us that education, achievement, and contribution to society provide no protection against prejudice. But her response shows us how individual injustice can spark collective action. The economic impact on Atlanta became immediate and measurable. The city faced federal funding reviews for all law enforcement grants, while the police department's budget came under intense scrutiny from city council members responding to constituent pressure. Mayor Rebecca Chen found herself navigating political pressure from multiple directions. Progressive council members demanded Hayes's immediate termination and comprehensive police reforms. Conservative members worried about federal overreach and officer morale. Business leaders feared that negative publicity would damage Atlanta's reputation as a progressive southern city. Chen called an emergency meeting with FBI Director Mitchell to discuss federal cooperation. Director, the city wants to work collaboratively on reforms rather than facing adversarial federal oversight. Marcus anticipated this conversation. Mayor Chen, collaboration requires genuine commitment to change. Symbolic gestures won't satisfy federal civil rights requirements. Angela joined the meeting via video conference from Emory University, where she was leading a research team documenting police reform models from successful international programs. Mayor Chen, Atlanta has an opportunity to become a national model for police accountability, but that requires embracing uncomfortable truths about current practices. The data Angela's team compiled was damning. Atlanta police had conducted 47% more traffic stops in predominantly black neighborhoods, despite lower contraband discovery rates. Community complaint procedures buried grievances in bureaucratic processes that discouraged follow-through. Officer training on bias recognition totaled 6 hours annually, compared to 48 hours of weapons training. 3 major corporations with Atlanta headquarters, Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines, and Home Depot, issued joint statements supporting police reform initiatives. Their combined economic influence carried significant political weight, particularly when they threatened to reconsider expansion plans pending resolution of civil rights concerns. Delta CEO Lisa Hoffman met privately with Angela to discuss corporate responsibility in social justice issues. Dr. Mitchell, Delta employs 68,000 people in Georgia. We can't remain silent when systemic bias threatens our employees and customers. Angela appreciated the corporate support, but pushed for concrete action. Ms. Hoffman, public statements matter, but policy changes matter more. Will Delta support federal legislation requiring police accountability standards? The conversation led to the formation of the Corporate Alliance for Police Reform, bringing together Fortune 500 companies to lobby for federal legislation. Their combined resources created a powerful counterbalance to law enforcement unions resisting change. International attention followed as the United Nations Human Rights Council requested briefings on American police practices. Angela addressed the UN General Assembly via satellite, describing her experience within the context of broader human rights concerns. Honorable delegates, the United States cannot credibly promote human rights globally while tolerating systematic bias domestically. My arrest illustrates how easily constitutional protections collapse when prejudice overrides procedure. The global spotlight intensified pressure on American politicians to demonstrate concrete progress on police reform. European allies privately questioned American moral authority on human rights issues, while authoritarian regimes publicly highlighted American police bias as evidence of democratic hypocrisy. Back in East Atlanta, community response was complex and nuanced. Some residents appreciated Angela's advocacy for police accountability, while others worried that negative attention would reduce police presence in high-crime areas. Maria Santos, whose son participated in Angela's literacy program, organized a community forum to discuss police relations. Dr. Angela has always fought for our children's futures. Now she's fighting for our dignity too. But longtime resident Robert Johnson expressed different concerns. I want fair police treatment, but I also want police protection. If they're afraid to do their jobs because of federal oversight, who keeps us safe?
Angela attended the community meeting, listening carefully to diverse perspectives. Mr. Johnson, effective policing and constitutional policing aren't mutually exclusive. Professional law enforcement protects communities better than biased enforcement. The discussion revealed the complexity of police reform in communities that experienced both over-policing and under-protection. Angela's academic background helped her navigate these tensions while building coalitions across different community interests. Universities nationwide began incorporating Angela's case into criminal justice curricula, while police academies reluctantly added modules on unconscious bias and community relations. The federal law enforcement training centers announced mandatory workshops on civil rights compliance for all federal agents. Angela found herself at the center of transformation she had never sought, but felt obligated to lead. Her arrest had become a catalyst for conversations about justice, dignity, and institutional accountability that extended far beyond one night in East Atlanta. 2 years after that transformative night in East Atlanta, Angela stood in the marble rotunda of the Georgia State Capitol, surrounded by legislators, civil rights leaders, and community activists who had gathered for the signing of the most comprehensive police reform legislation in Georgia's history. Governor Patricia Williams held the ceremonial pen, but everyone in the room understood that Angela's arrest had set these changes in motion. The transformation had been neither quick nor easy. Every reform measure had faced resistance from police unions, political opposition from conservative legislators, and skepticism from communities that had experienced decades of broken promises about police accountability. But the undeniable evidence of systematic bias, combined with Angela's strategic advocacy and Marcus's federal influence, had created unstoppable momentum for change. The Georgia Police Transparency and Accountability Act represents more than legislative victory, Governor Williams announced before signing the bill. It represents our commitment to ensuring that what happened to Dr. Angela Mitchell never happens to another Georgian. The legislation was comprehensive and enforceable. Every police department in Georgia would now operate under standardized procedures for identity verification, with officers facing personal liability for arrests made without proper justification. Body cameras became mandatory for all interactions, with footage automatically uploaded to civilian oversight databases. Police training would include 40 hours annually on constitutional rights and bias recognition, compared to the previous 6 hours every 3 years. Angela found herself at the center of transformation she had never sought, but felt obligated to lead. Her arrest had become a catalyst for conversations about justice, dignity, and institutional accountability that extended far beyond one night in East Atlanta. 2 years after that transformative night in East Atlanta, Angela stood in the marble rotunda of the Georgia State Capitol, surrounded by legislators, civil rights leaders, and community activists who had gathered for the signing of the most comprehensive police reform legislation in Georgia's history. Governor Patricia Williams held the ceremonial pen, but everyone in the room understood that Angela's arrest had set these changes in motion. The transformation had been neither quick nor easy. Every reform measure had faced resistance from police unions, political opposition from conservative legislators, and skepticism from communities that had experienced decades of broken promises about police accountability. But the undeniable evidence of systematic bias, combined with Angela's strategic advocacy and Marcus's federal influence, had created unstoppable momentum for change. The Georgia Police Transparency and Accountability Act represents more than legislative victory, Governor Williams announced before signing the bill. It represents our commitment to ensuring that what happened to Dr. Angela Mitchell never happens to another Georgian. The legislation was comprehensive and enforceable. Every police department in Georgia would now operate under standardized procedures for identity verification, with officers facing personal liability for arrests made without proper justification. Body cameras became mandatory for all interactions, with footage automatically uploaded to civilian oversight databases. Police training would include 40 hours annually on constitutional rights and bias recognition, compared to the previous 6 hours every 3 years. Angela watched the signing ceremony with mixed emotions. The victories were real and measurable, but she had learned that legislative success was only the beginning of actual implementation. The true test would come in midnight traffic stops in rural counties, in community interactions in low-income neighborhoods, in the daily decisions made by individual officers who might resist change despite new laws requiring it. Captain Robert Hayes had been released from federal prison after serving 18 months of his 3-year sentence. His conviction for civil rights violations had stripped him of law enforcement certification permanently, but he had found work as a security consultant, ironically advising companies on avoiding discrimination lawsuits. The irony wasn't lost on anyone familiar with his case. Hayes had never publicly apologized or acknowledged wrongdoing. In a brief interview with a local newspaper upon his release, he maintained that he had followed proper procedures and that federal prosecution was political overreach. "I was protecting my community," he insisted. "If that's a crime now, then law enforcement has become impossible." Detective Sarah Williams had not only kept her job, but had been promoted to Deputy Chief of Community Relations for the entire Atlanta Police Department. Her courage in challenging Hayes's orders that night had become legendary within police law enforcement circles, taught in police academies as an example of ethical leadership under pressure. Williams now oversaw a team of 40 officers dedicated to community engagement, conflict resolution, and police accountability. Her unit had become a model replicated in 63 cities across the United States, with Williams regularly traveling to train other departments in constitutional policing principles. "Dr. Mitchell's arrest taught me that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit," Williams told a gathering of police recruits at the Georgia Public Safety Training Center. "Real police work means protecting everyone's rights, especially when it's difficult or unpopular." Officer Janet Foster had left the Atlanta Police Department to become a full-time trainer and consultant on police reform.
Her methodical documentation of Angela's arrest had become a case study in proper evidence handling and procedural compliance, used in training programs nationwide. Foster had testified before Congress 3 times, sharing her perspective on how individual officers could resist institutional bias while maintaining professional loyalty. Foster's story resonated particularly with female officers and officers of color who often faced pressure to conform to departmental cultures that discouraged questioning authority. Her example had inspired hundreds of officers to report misconduct, leading to investigations and reforms in departments across multiple states. Officer Foster showed us that doing the right thing requires courage, but courage gets easier with practice, explained Lieutenant Maria Gonzalez, who had reported excessive force in her Phoenix department after hearing Foster speak at a training conference. Her example gave me permission to be the officer I wanted to be, not just the officer my department expected. The East Atlanta Police Station had become an unlikely tourist destination for criminal justice students and police reform advocates from around the world. Federal monitors had transformed operations so completely that the station now hosted international delegations studying American police accountability measures.
Chief David Morrison had initially viewed federal oversight as punishment, but had evolved into one of its strongest advocates. Under his leadership, the Atlanta Police Department had become a national model for constitutional policing, with crime rates declining even as community satisfaction increased dramatically. Federal monitoring didn't weaken our police force, Morrison explained to a gathering of police chiefs from across the Southeast. It made us more effective at actual police work because we stopped wasting time on discriminatory practices that don't improve public safety. The data supported Morrison's claims convincingly. Atlanta police had reduced racial disparities in traffic stops by 78% while maintaining arrest rates for serious crimes. Community cooperation with investigations had increased by 59%, leading to higher conviction rates for violent offenses. Officer retention had improved as workplace culture became more professional and less tolerant of misconduct. Marcus had used his position as FBI director to champion federal legislation requiring police accountability standards nationwide. His unique perspective as both law enforcement leader and husband of a victim had given him unparalleled credibility with constituencies that typically opposed reform initiatives. The Federal Police Standards Act, passed after 18 months of congressional debate, established minimum requirements for police training, civilian oversight, and constitutional compliance for all departments receiving federal funding. The legislation included whistleblower protections for officers reporting misconduct and personal liability provisions for supervisors who failed to address civil rights violations. Constitutional policing isn't anti-police, Marcus testified during the final congressional hearings on the legislation. Constitutional policing is pro-police because it protects honest officers from being undermined by colleagues who violate their oath of office. The FBI had restructured its Civil Rights Division, creating rapid response teams that could investigate police misconduct within 24 hours of reported incidents. The changes had led to federal interventions in 147 police departments and the prosecution of over 600 officers for constitutional violations. Universities nationwide had established comprehensive police community relations programs, with the Mitchell Institute for Constitutional Policing becoming the premier research center for evidence-based law enforcement practices. The Institute had published 17 major studies on police reform implementation, providing data-driven guidance for departments attempting to improve community relations. Angela served as the director of the Institute while maintaining her position at Emory University. Her research had evolved to include longitudinal studies of police reform effectiveness, tracking which interventions produced lasting change versus superficial compliance. Her findings had influenced policy decisions in hundreds of communities. Corporate America had maintained sustained pressure for police reform through the Corporate Alliance for Police Reform, which had grown to include over 800 companies representing 12 million employees. Their economic influence had proven crucial in sustaining political momentum for change when initial enthusiasm began to wane among elected officials. The alliance had implemented hiring preferences for companies demonstrating commitment to constitutional policing, created employee assistance programs for workers experiencing police bias, and funded research into the economic costs of discriminatory law enforcement. Their annual report showed that police misconduct cost American businesses over $14 billion annually in lost productivity, legal fees, and damaged community relations. International observers had credited the American police reform movement sparked by Angela's case with influencing similar initiatives in 17 countries. The United Nations had incorporated lessons from American police accountability measures into human rights recommendations for member nations, while the European Union had funded research programs based on American reform models. British police departments had implemented bias training programs modeled on Atlanta's reforms, while Canadian provinces had adopted civilian oversight requirements inspired by American legislation. The global impact had enhanced America's soft power influence in international human rights discussions. But perhaps the most meaningful changes were visible in communities across America, where children now participated in police community partnerships that would have been impossible before Angela's arrest forced national conversations about dignity and respect. Carmen Rodriguez, Angela's sister, had established police accountability programs in Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Denver using models developed in Atlanta. Her organization, Communities for Constitutional Policing, had trained over 4,000 community leaders in police oversight techniques and civil rights advocacy. Angela's arrest changed how we think about police relations nationwide, but real change happens one neighborhood at a time, one conversation at a time, one traffic stop at a time. The legal precedents established by Angela's case continued expanding through federal court decisions. Judges now applied stricter scrutiny to police arrests lacking proper justification, while civil rights attorneys used the Mitchell precedent to challenge discriminatory enforcement patterns in dozens of ongoing cases. The Supreme Court had agreed to hear Mitchell v. Atlanta Police Department, a civil rights lawsuit that could establish national standards for police conduct during investigatory stops. Legal scholars predicted the case would become as significant as Miranda v. Arizona in defining constitutional requirements for police interactions with citizens.
Young activists had emerged from the movement, many inspired by Angela's approach of combining moral clarity with strategic thinking and evidence-based advocacy. The National Youth Police Accountability Network, founded by high school students from 12 states, organized educational programs that brought young people and police officers together to discuss constitutional rights and community safety. These youth programs had produced remarkable results. Students who participated in police community dialogues were 63% more likely to report crimes when they occurred, while officers who worked with youth programs showed 41% fewer bias-related complaints compared to colleagues without such involvement. Angela often spoke to these young activists, emphasizing the importance of sustained engagement beyond moments of crisis and media attention. Change doesn't happen in the heat of outrage, she would tell them during workshops and conferences. Change happens through persistent work when cameras aren't rolling and headlines have moved on to other stories. The anniversary of her arrest had become an annual day of reflection on police community relations, observed in over 300 cities nationwide. Angela used these occasions to highlight ongoing challenges and the work still needed to achieve truly equitable policing across all communities. Local commemorations included community forums where residents and police officers discussed progress and continuing concerns. These conversations had produced tangible improvements in police practices while building relationships that enhanced public safety through cooperation rather than confrontation. On this second anniversary, Angela stood before the largest gathering yet,
Over 10,000 people assembled in Atlanta's Centennial Olympic Park for a celebration of police reform progress and a commitment to continued advocacy. The crowd included police officers, community leaders, elected officials, and families affected by police misconduct from across the country. 2 years ago, I was arrested for the crime of existing in a space where someone decided I didn't belong, Angela began, her voice carrying across the park through speakers and live stream feeds reaching millions more. Tonight, I stand before you not as a victim, but as proof that individual injustice can become collective action when we refuse to accept discrimination as inevitable. The sustained applause reflected how far the conversation had evolved, but Angela quickly redirected attention from personal recognition to ongoing work. She had deliberately positioned her advocacy beyond personal grievance, focusing instead on systemic solutions that would outlast any single incident or individual. The question isn't whether we can afford to reform police practices, she continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had transformed personal pain into public purpose. The question is whether we can afford not to reform them. Every person here tonight has the power to ensure that what happened to me becomes the catalyst for change that protects everyone. As Angela concluded her remarks, she reflected on the unexpected journey from victim to advocate to catalyst for national transformation. The arrest that had threatened to humiliate her had instead become the foundation for changes that would protect countless others from similar injustice. The real measure of success wouldn't be applause or awards, she knew. It would be the phone call that never came because an officer chose verification over assumption. The traffic stop that ended in respectful interaction rather than wrongful arrest. The community where children saw police as protectors rather than threats to be feared. Walking through Atlanta streets after the anniversary gathering, Angela passed the East Atlanta Police Station where federal monitors continued overseeing constitutional compliance. The building that had once symbolized institutional bias now represented the possibility of transformation when communities demanded accountability and elected officials responded with meaningful action. Her story had become larger than any single incident, evolving into a framework for understanding how justice delayed could become justice delivered when people refused to accept injustice as inevitable. The arrest that had threatened to end her evening had instead begun a movement that would reshape American policing for generations to come. The work continued, driven by the understanding that individual dignity and community safety were not competing values, but complementary goals that required constant vigilance to maintain. Angela's legacy would be measured not in the moment of her arrest, but in the countless moments of respectful interaction between police and citizens that her advocacy had made possible.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.